Former racist people of Reddit, what changed your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. My uncle by marriage grew up with racist parents. But one day when he was 20, he fell asleep at the wheel after working a double shift and rolled off the side of the road into a ditch late one night. It was a country road in nowhere upstate New York, and the only other person on the road at the time was a Puerto Rican man also getting off work. Pulled him from the car and drove to the nearest gas station to use the payphone. Way before cell phones existed. My uncle survived thanks to that man. His car caught fire shortly after. My uncle was so touched by this man's kindness he vowed to help the man as much as could, until my uncle's death from cancer in 2013. They remained friends. I remember hearing the story during Thanksgiving one year when I was younger and not really understanding what racism was. I grew up in a town where other races were practically a theoretical concept. I then went to college and realized we are all just people and suck equally. Saw a really good Pepsi commercial. I grew up as one of the only white people in a predominantly black area. My parents drilled into me that they hate me just because I'm white and to fear them. And at the time they weren't necessarily wrong, because many of those kids were being told the same thing about me at home. I just learned from experience it isn't true. I made many friends that I still love dearly, and I wish neither of us had this mindset drilled into us. Not me, but my dad's story. In the 1970s, my dad was in elementary school, said he had always thought African Americans were just different. So one day he's standing in line, and there was two African American brothers standing behind my dad when my dad turns to the younger brother and calls him a racist term. I don't remember which one. The older brother turns to my dad, winds up, and punches him straight in the face. He said he was bleeding. It hurt like hell. And he was crying, but ever since that day he knew they were just like everyone else, because that's exactly what he would have done. Am a Hindu, and in India Hindus and Muslims have little bit of beef in between. There was a new student in class, Muslim. My benchmate was absent that day. Teacher made him sit on my bench with me and said no one will change their places. Time passes, small talk, common interests, good friends. I grew up in a family that was extremely racist towards African Americans. Especially they would always rant about how AA customers at their jobs are always rude and too lazy to clean up after themselves. After I got a job myself, I realized that it seems like every races are the same. Some are rude, some are lazy. Most people are nice regardless of the color of their skin. I just find it unfair how my parents specifically targeted AA people. I've experienced just about the same amount of rudeness and laziness from the other races. Just recently actually. I always thought this race was simple-minded and sometimes outright idiotic. But as a F1 fan, I finally gave NASCAR a try and realized that it's not all just left turns and crashes. I now find NASCAR very enjoyable to watch. My education growing up was fairly conservative and my neighborhood lacked diversity. When I went to college, I met a ton of people who were different from me but just as human. Not sure this counts. But I went from living in a hyper-religious and extremely intolerant and completely white environment to living in a county where I was the foreigner and received quite a bit of abuse for it. Swore I would never be that kind of person. I'm Asian and lived in the poorer parts of town. I often got harassed and even beat up by black kids, often older kids, throughout late elementary and early middle school. So I had a pretty bad opinion of them growing up. Then I met a black kid who saw me playing Pokemon on my Game Boy, and he enthusiastically asked me a bunch of questions like who my starter was and if I got to the Elite Four. I was wary of him at first, but he eventually became my best friend throughout middle school and some of high school. Later in high school he started to change. He hung around the bad crowd. They were all black IIRC. And he started to pretend like I didn't exist. I knew one of those dudes from my class and overheard him calling anime gay-ass Chinese cartoons. Otherwise I never had any encounters with them. I didn't talk to my friend again until senior year. He told me his old friend switched schools, got expelled or arrested. We just buried the hatchet and talked about anime and video games again like old times. Not strictly racist, but I held a fair amount of backwards views and was what I consider to be skeptical to a fault, which led to some negative preconceptions of people. It was all from misdirected fear and anger though. As I worked on being more mentally healthy and confronting those feelings for what they are, the views I thought I believed in so strongly just fell away. It's an exhausting way to live. Being hateful. It's extremely alienating. And that isolation just fuels your self-loathing, which is the root of the fear and anger. I can't say there was some altruistic moment of realization. I just sorta let it go. I was raised in a very conservative household that was in a very well-off area of my city. So there weren't a lot of black or Hispanic minorities. But there were a lot of Middle Eastern minorities. They were also well off. I picked up some of my parents' racist mentalities and held onto them for a long time. I didn't start changing my mentality until I went to college and met a lot of people who were in vastly different economic situations. My parents made it seem like black and Hispanic people were mostly in the lower tax brackets because of their own faults, but that obviously isn't the case. It made me realize that hard work does not pay off in the end. My Phil was a personal injury lawyer and was doing very well until tort reform was passed in my state. Then things went downhill fast also. My own financial struggles and desperateness also put me in the shoes of criminals, and helped me understand that, even though there are bad eggs, not everybody in a specific race is bad. The system is rigged against people who struggle. Honestly, I thought there would be a difference, but they all taste the same. I stopped being Mormon. I grew up, moved away from the racist influences, met people of other races, and decided then that I would treat people as individuals to like or not, as attitude dictated, not by race, religion, sexuality, etc. Makes life simpler. It takes way too much energy to hate. I am still a young person, but I was a racist piece of shit for a long time. I'm sure if you go back enough in my post history, you can still see the remnants of who I used to be. For me, what really changed it was growing up and having good friends that cared enough to see the person I could be, even though I was an unbelievably nasty racist poss. Through many conversations, interactions, and even arguments, I grew up as a person into who I am today. I'm still not the greatest person on earth, but I'm still working to be the best I can be. I used to be racist cuss I though people that play Mario Kart were called racists instead of racers. Was raised as a conservative white Christian. Of course I'd never say, I am a racist. I'd just say things along the lines of, I'm not racist. I just think that everyone should look, speak, and act like white people if they want to have jobs and property. Just getting the fuck out of rural Arizona. Moving to a city and meeting new people shattered my entire worldview. Within a couple years, my perspective had widened enough to see my previous views and lifestyle as laughable. Moving TF out of rural TX and meeting more people. Also working and having to work with and around people of different races and walks of life. I didn't realize I was racist. And when I realized I couldn't recognize racist behavior at all, I had to take a step back and re-evaluate myself. I grew up in a mostly white town. I can count on one hand the number of black people at my local high school. My mother is passively racist, and my father and brother are openly racist against black people, Chinese, Mexicans, Muslims, a lot of races and ethnicities. when I learned about the Indigenous in school. As per new Ontario curriculum, all three were vocally opposed to it, and commonly expressed that it was stupid. It was a weird experience, especially because I had been desensitized to racist behavior for a good portion of my life. It's hell to still be living with my family now that I realize how horrible they are. This is a comment I saved from a previous post with a similar question. Let's pretend you've never seen a platypus, but you've heard about them. You've heard that they have a bill and webbed feet. You've heard that they lay eggs. You've heard that they have a tail like a beaver. But you, yourself, have never seen one. You take for granted that these things are true because everyone around you says they are. I grew up in a super tiny farm town in the middle of nowhere. All 300 people in the town were white. My parents were racist, my friends were racist, my friends' parents were racists. Even the vast majority of teachers in our K-12 school grew up in or around my town. And were racist, guess what? With literally every single person around me telling me that black people were inferior. I thought black people were inferior. I took for granted that it was true, because it seemed unlikely that everyone was wrong. Just like I currently take for granted that a platypus lays eggs. When I was 10, I went to a summer camp a few hours north of me. There were black, Hispanic, and Asian kids there. Hell, I even shared a cabin with a black kid. I honestly thought I would get attacked at night. By the end of the third day of camp, I realized that other than talking a bit different, my black cabin mate was no different than my white cabin mates. And the talking a bit different thing didn't bother me. I had family from other parts of the US that talked different from me. And it didn't matter much. This started a slow but steady realization in me that maybe my parents were wrong about things. And maybe people were just people. I'd like to think that I treat everyone with the same level of respect today. I sincerely hope I do. Anyway, still not sure about platypus though. Edit. This has gotten some attention, so I'd like to share another story. After high school, I moved to Kansas City and rented a home with some friends in a nicer part of town. One day my car broke down, and I was determined to fix it myself by watching YouTube videos despite having zero experience with cars. This resulted in my car being up on blocks for nearly 2 months. One of my better friends from work was a guy we'll call Bob. Bob was black and drove a super rundown car. We had an agreement that if he drove me to and from work every day, I would put a tank of gas in his car once a week and buy lunches for us now and then. One day, we got pulled over on the way into work. The cop asked Bob if he knew why he was being pulled over, and Bob said no. The cop then made a big deal about how Bob was driving erratically. After asking a few questions, he let us go without a ticket. I thought the whole thing was odd, as Bob's driving was just fine. But we didn't really talk about it much. A few weeks later it happened again. After the cop let us go, I turned to Bob and said, "Wait, was this because you are black?" Bob looked at me like I was the dumbest thing he had seen all week, and then informed me of the concept of driving while black. He said you can drive through the nice part of town while black, but only if you have a nice car. If you have a crap car while black, you are immediately suspected of doing something wrong. This was a real eye-opener for me. While I would have said that I didn't see black people as inferior to white people, I certainly didn't fully grasp that there really is two different worlds in our country. I didn't get the gravity or scope of being subtlety, or not so subtlety, treated like a second-class citizen. I am positive that I still don't fully get it. I guess my point with this is, you can pull yourself out of racism, but still not be able to appreciate the harm racism does, or the pervasiveness of it. Final edit. I've received a lot of Reddit awards, and while I genuinely appreciate them, I would ask that people consider spending their money here or here instead. High school. Went from my Brooklyn neighborhood where I threw around every ugly word with my buddies almost daily to my very first week in high school when I said some stupid comment and got the dirtiest looks from my brand new friends. It was the combination of disgust, disappointment, and even pity that made me realize that something was very wrong and that something was in me. I had to make very conscious efforts to not think like that for years until it finally came naturally. The best thing is my 3 children don't have to make any effort at all. It's just normal for them to not think the way I did. I was never racist, just very sheltered. I remember watching a Star Trek episode named Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, S-03E15. It was about 2 guys who were fighting hell-bent on killing each other. The reason behind this was one was black on the right, white on the left, and the other was white on the right and black on the left. After watching that episode, it made me realize that hating someone for the color, or colors, of their skin was absurd and stupid. Growing up. Former racist people of Reddit, what changed your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more.